Amazing. Amazing. The governor of the state of Wisconsin apparently gets punked thinking he's talking with David Koch, who says, we've got a vested interest here. And the governor says, well, yeah. And the governor says, this is a Ronald Reagan moment. When he busted Patco, that's what we're trying to do here, essentially. Bryan Preston is with us with Pajamas Media, pajamasmedia.com/Tatler. He's the editor-in-large at Pajamas Media. Bryan, welcome.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
As a conservative, doesn't it horrify you that there is a war on working people in this country?
Well, I wouldn't characterize it as a war on working people, so I reject the premise and substitute my own, which is that what we have is a set of unions here that are clinging to power in spite of the fiscal straits that...
Wait a minute. Yeah. Clinging to what power?
Clinging to the power they have over the Democratic Party and the power they have over the wallets of American taxpayers.
The power to collectively bargain?
Well, the power to collectively bargain for state workers and for federal workers is a relatively new thing. It's the kind of thing that FDR actually
So is the end of whites only lunch counters. That doesn't mean it was ever the wrong thing or the right thing historically. Come on.
Come on, what? I mean, the comparison.
Yeah, it was John Kennedy who gave at the federal level. It happened back in the 50s in New York with Mayor whatever his name was, Grant, I think. But you're right. It's a relatively recent thing. It's a relatively recent. The right to have organized labor in the United States only originated in 1935. It's relatively recent. There's a lot of things that are relatively recent. The right of women to vote in this country is relatively recent. The right of people to I'm sputtering here.
It's okay. Take a deep breath.
I need to do that. We'll do that. We're talking with Bryan Preston, the editor-at-large of Pajamas Media. I just don't understand, unless you are, and I don't want to personalize this, so let me use this as the plural you rather than the personal you, but unless y'all are millionaires and billionaires, why would you have why would it matter to you whether or not workers have the right to collectively bargain, assuming that you're not a member of a union yourself?
No, I'm not. And we're actually talking about a bit of an apples and oranges thing here. I'm actually perfectly fine with workers in the private sector being able to get together and collectively bargain. That's fine. That's not what's on the table in Wisconsin, though. The Wisconsin bill deals only with state workers. And actually, even they would still be allowed to unionize. There would just be restrictions.
Right, they'd all be allowed to wear the same T-shirt. And they could only negotiate wage. All they could negotiate would be wages, and it couldn't be above the level of inflation. That is not a union, and you know that, Bryan.
No, but that's
you're being disingenuous.
Fine. Why should they be able to demand out of the taxpayers pay raises that are above the rate of inflation? Why should they be allowed to do that as a union?
They do not have.
I'm fine with that.
They do not have the right. Well, okay, we'll call it the right to demand, because the taxpayers are their employers and they are employees, and employees should have the right to say, we demand this, and employers should have the right to say, we're not going to give you that. And it very often works out that way. These people have already given up $100 million. These guys have agreed to all of the concessions that Governor Walker wants, except for the right to collectively bargain. He wants to say to them, you can no longer get together and come to me as a democratic institution, speaking for the majority of your members, and lay on the table what your demands, to use your word, are. Now it's going to have to be every single one of you is going to have to stand in line in front of my office and beg for his own paycheck.
Well, 2 points to that. First off, the taxpayers did speak on this issue in November when they elected Governor Walker. And
no, they didn't.
Majority.
Yeah, this was not an issue in the election, Bryan, and you know that too.
It was among them. It was among the issues that were in the campaign, and the taxpayers spoke. The taxpayers also.
It was not
through their elected.
I'm sorry, Bryan. I can't say this from personal knowledge because I was not in Wisconsin, but we've talked to a number of people from Wisconsin. I don't know. Do you live in Wisconsin?
No, I'm in Texas.
Okay. So to the best of my knowledge, there were no ads being run by Scott Walker saying, if I'm elected, one of the first things I'm going to do is end the right of state workers to collectively bargain. To the best of my knowledge, such an ad never ran. To the best of my knowledge, an ad never ran that said, if I'm elected, the first thing I'm going to do is privatize the power plants and sell them off to the Koch brothers.
There's that Koch brothers stuff again. I heard you talking about that when I was on the line. Do you ever talk about George Soros' role on your side of the aisle and all the many things he funds and the things he does? No, it's
let's talk about that, Bryan. I think that's a fascinating point, because what I find remarkable about the billionaires on the left, the George Soros, the Warren Buffetts, is that they're funding projects and they're promoting programs that benefit average working people and that work to their detriment as billionaires. Whereas the billionaires on your side will have nothing to do with that, but will only fund those things that make them richer, which gets me back to the original question. Why would anybody who's not a billionaire want to go along with this billionaire's agenda?
Well,
of destroying working people.
Billionaire's agenda. So once again, I'm going to reject.
It is a billionaire's agenda, Bryan. There's nothing. The average working person has got nothing in this.
It's actually a taxpayer's agenda, and it's a right to work agenda. At least in some of the other states that are involved here.
Right to work.
In Wisconsin, yeah, in Indiana, it's been a right to work issue.
Right to work is a euphemism for not having a union, for your employer having the right to say, no, we're not going to let you have a union.
Well, right to work is a legal means by which you can work in a state without being forced to join a union.
Since Taft-Hartley, I mean, this is this is like right to life, pro-choice. If you're going to use language, I'm going to call you on it. I mean, what you're talking about. Again, I don't understand. Why,
evidently,
if you're an average working guy, if you, not you, but in general, why, what's the matter with Kansas? Why is it that people will vote for politicians who are working in the interests of multimillionaires and billionaires? And against the interests of average working people. Why?
Because it's just not the facts. I mean, if you look at the way the United States right-to-work laws are shaped right now, there are about 22, 23 states that have right-to-work laws. And if you want to look at the economics of these states, most of these states are outperforming the states that don't have right-to-work laws. So when
that's not necessarily true.
It is actually true. Texas, for instance, where I am, is a right-to-work state, and it has created more jobs than all other states combined over the last several years.
Well, it's also one of the largest states if you're doing absolute numbers, and there's no correlation between states with public employee unions and, for example, budget deficits. There's no correlation between states with public employee unions and, for example, the GDP of the state, the competency of the state. I mean, that canard. Chris Hayes knocked that down last night on Rachel Maddow's show with charts and graphs. I mean, it's been
Rachel Maddow,
thoroughly debunked.
And I'm sure Rachel really challenged Chris Hayes' facts on the show.
No, Chris was guest hosting. My point is that.
That's an echo chamber over there. So citing that really.
No, my point is that figures can lie. Figures don't lie, but liars can figure. That pulling one state out and saying, "Hey, let's generalize this to the nation."
Actually, I didn't pull one state out. I said there are about 22, 23 states with right-to-work laws, and those states generally.
Yeah, in Alabama and Mississippi, they're doing just great, aren't they?
And Florida's doing pretty well, and Texas is doing pretty well, and Oklahoma's doing pretty well.
Yeah, so you've got a few, and you got a few. I just don't see where there's a correlation. Anyhow, Bryan Preston, editor-in-large, pajamasmedia.com/Tatler?
Tatler, that's correct.
Okay.
With one T.
Okay, with one T. Got it. Bryan, good talking with you.